Hey guys, welcome to a very, very special after hours panel. We're going to wrap this up. We had such an amazing, tremendous day. We're going to talk about and celebrate the life of George Romero with a very special guest. And also, I have a very special co moderator here, Freddy Mejia.
Right here, Freddy Ruiz.
Oh, yeah, Freddy Ruiz. I'm sorry. We had a Freddy Mejia earlier, and it's like I've been going back and forth. No, we have
All good, man.
Freddy
We're dime a
Ruiz,
dozen.
or Phoenix extraordinaire.
Yeah, I mean,
Awesome.
I'm sad. I got my Lost Boys behind me. I got my Romero hat, Romero shirt. We're set, man.
Yeah, that's 100%. Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and bring our special guest, the co-author of The Living Dead,
Oh yeah.
Daniel. Yep. There we go. I got mine. You got yours. And actually, I'm still rating mine. There'll be, spoilers will be light. All right. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, I got my copy too.
Oh, there we go.
Hey.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for joining us here at TxLCC Comic Con. Man, such an immense honor having you on board, brother.
Oh man, anytime. Thanks for having me.
And for a lot of those new folks that are jumping in right now, Daniel Kraus is he is one of the New York best-selling authors as well. You also co-wrote the Guillermo del Toro's book,
The Shape of Water.
The
Yeah.
Shape of Water. Right, it was the novel adaptation.
Yes, we also did the book Troll Hunters.
Yeah.
Before it was the Netflix show.
Oh, nice. So I'm gonna hand it off to you, Daniel. If you could just reintroduce yourself to our viewers.
Oh sure. My name is Daniel Kraus. I am a novelist, I guess. Written about, I think I have 11 books out right now. And yeah, as mentioned, I did a couple collaborations with Guillermo del Toro. But the book I'm proudest of is the new one that I did with my hero, George Romero, who we will obviously we'll talk about this, but he was someone who he wasn't a influence on me. He was really the influence on me. The person. I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be doing any kind of art really if it wasn't for him.
And so during the in the green room we were having a conversation. How Freddie and I and Daniel and Kevin as well. So how empowering it is to have growing up and having such a horror mastermind pillar of the community with a Latino surname. So it was such an empowering feeling, especially with Living Dead, Night Living Dead being such an influential piece with the social commentary. And for me, Ben was my hero. Growing up, seeing the African American, protagonist taking a role and taking the lead, and it's just scary how timely it is still. It's still relevant until even right now.
Yeah, I think that's the mark of great art. I think is that it maintains its relevance, and I think in the case of something like Night Living Dead, it grows up with you. I think the Night Living Dead that I saw as a 5 or 6 year old kid is not the one I saw when I was 12 or 20. You look at it at different ages and you find new things in it. And I think that's what great art is.
And I think too, like I was talking about this in the green room earlier with you guys, like the greatest thing about Romero for me is you get that subtext, you get the social political commentaries that George is so perfect at doing, but it's wrapped up in this like entertaining, and it has just this perfect spectacle to it. And so as you're growing up watching it, you're always there for the spectacle. But then the more you grow up and the more you realize with the world and how it goes, the more you get. Like it's just never ending sustenance from his films.
Right.
And that's one of the things like each year that I love. And also you're talking about like how, you know, how telling he is of society, and we're talking about how like scary the world gets every year. Honestly, I think George with each one of his films is so ahead of its time, which I'll get to in a little bit talking about the book. But like every time I watch a George Romero movie, especially the Living Dead series, the older I get and the more the world progresses, the more it seems like the world, sadly to an extent, is becoming his films. And it's something that I think horror fans, we learn from it, and we can hope the rest of the world can learn from it too.
Yeah, I think I think he was. Well, I know he was, and his wife tells me the same thing. He was a pessimist when it came to human nature. He was a glass half empty type of guy. So he really, you know, some people make movies about the good parts of human nature. He tended to focus on the opposite, and because of that, and because the direction the country, you know, can be seen as heading, his movies seem more and more realistic, more and more present. Yeah,
You can see some of these characters being so industrious, you know, and building and creating and in defense, and then just the ever, you know, the threat of outside, from the threat of outside, and just everything just collapses inward. You know, it goes back to him being pessimist towards the view of humanity, ultimately of its ultimate.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. When you talk about the industriousness of his characters, one of the great things about Romero is he didn't make movies that were a bunch of teenagers being chased, teenagers doing dumb things. I mean, those movies are fun too.
Yeah.
But he made movies about really smart people in general, who did a lot of things right. You know, like the people in Night of the Living Dead, they boarded up that place pretty well. They had a good plan of escape at one point. People in Dawn of the Dead, they do a great job of securing the place. The people in Day of the Dead, I mean, they're working on some pretty amazing stuff down there. So they are smart. They're like, by the time you get to Day of the Dead, you're talking about top scientists and military people. But they can't. It doesn't. None of it matters because they can't get along, and so
well, they make those mistakes. They're very human mistakes, right? Greed, you know, the even racial tensions. You're gonna even go on.
Yeah, with Miguel in Day of the Dead. That's because, and that's, you know, it's kind of going like what you said, Daniel. It's like even the greatest minds can crumble if we're not unified, you know?
Yeah.
And I think throughout, especially with the Living Dead novel, there's a lot about unification in there that's so relevant to today's society. And like going back to like the idea that George is like ahead of his time, honestly. So I rewatched Diary of the Dead during like the height of quarantine. It's just kind of on a whim. And I remember when I first saw it, I was kind of like a little jackass kid, like I know everything about horror movies. And I watched it and I was like, man, I'm so done with the whole found footage thing. And I was a little bummed out when I watched it. I was like, I don't know if this is really like what I wanted from George. Rewatching it now, because I was like, there's no way these white kids are this dumb. But rewatching it now, I'm like, this is society. Everything from like the innate need to capture everything on footage right then and there to reporting it on like social media and the internet. It's all what we are living in today. And what I thought was dumb back then, I realized now George was talking about how stupid we are because we do it. And it's genius. It scared the hell out of me watching that movie at the height of quarantine, because like this is where the world feels like it's going. And it's so much of that is in the book that you finished for him. And like, man, I just gotta ask real quick, getting into questions already. How much of it, like I know you talk about it in the afterword, how much of it was already there that you saw George kind of predicting the future, and how much of it was you, without going into too many spoilers?
Well, first of all, a side note that Diary of the Dead is probably the movie that I try to get people to watch the most, because I think it's I had sort of a similar situation. I liked it when it came out, but it did blow me away. But when you think about that movie being made, I think the social media site at the time was probably MySpace.
Yeah.
We weren't very far into it.
It was just burgeoning, yeah.
Yeah, and he's able to tap into, this idea that pointing the camera at ourselves and us looking inward instead of looking outward, and that's always been his sort of hobby horse. That's his topic. And when sort of social media took over, he really saw that magnified. It's like, oh, we're never going to look outward again. We're always going to be looking to the mirrors, or our cell phones became the new mirrors, and so forth. It's a really amazing film. If you haven't seen it, it's better now than ever.
Oh no, yeah, totally.
So as far as the book goes, if you're joining late, we're talking about this book. It's like it would really depend, because the thing about this book is he didn't write part of it and stuff. As you know from the author's note, he sort of wrote parts that ended up being appropriate all across the book.
So it's about 2/3 he finished.
No, I would say about 1/3 he finished.
1/3, yeah.
But then he had left a bunch of notes
right
where things were going. But that 1/3 he finished wasn't necessarily the first third. It was stuff in the beginning. There was some stuff in the middle. There was some stuff at the very end. And so my job was really connecting all these dots, which in a way was really, really difficult. And it would have been much easier if he had just written half the book and stopped. But instead, I was connecting these dots, which was really complicated. But the nice part of it is that there was always an element of George along the way. Like, I was always connecting dots, and I could never go too far off into my own spirals, because I had to make it to the next point on the line that George had set out.
Yeah.
So that always brought me in back to George.
I assume that was very challenging for you to put yourself in George Romero's mindset. So what kind of how did that look like for you to go into George?
Well, to start with, to go way back, Night of the Living Dead is the first movie I remember seeing at 5 or 6 years old. I'm sure I must have seen things beforehand, but I remember Night of the Living Dead. And because of the copyright problem with it, it was just always on. And so I saw it just endlessly as a kid. It was the movie for me as a little kid, and then as I continued to grow up. We didn't even have video stores I lived in the country, so we didn't have video stores for a long time. So it was a long time until I got to see the rest of his movies. They'd have to just show up on TV randomly, so it took a long time. So he was already a part of my DNA almost. Because when you're absorbing a movie at that age, like you're absorbing a different kind of way. It's not like you watch a movie today as an adult and you take certain things from it. This was affecting how I was developing, in a positive way.
Yeah.
I suppose it could have gone wrong, but it developed in a very, very positive way because George was a filmmaker. And again, I grew up in a rural town. And so here was somebody making a movie with a black protagonist. I didn't know any black people. And Ben was my hero, and he continued to make movies that were about societal issues and social injustice and all these things that I have no doubt made me a better person just growing up. So I continued to, study him and deeply study really his films throughout my life. When I started working on this, I took it obviously to another level because I wanted to get inside his head. And so obviously went back and watched the movies a bunch and listened and read all the interviews he had done, commentary tracks, obviously. One of the most important things I did was I talked to his wife. I spent some time with her, and we spoke in detail about just George, and the way he lived and the way he died, honestly, and the things he loved and the things he hated and all that stuff. So
you had a real, not spoiler, but you had a great homage to his death, in my opinion. in the book that like they brought a tear to my eye. I had to put the book down for a minute.
Well, one of the things that I did, just for that, I'm glad you liked it, was to put homages to just his life into the book. And that was just little things for me and for fans to know that, you know, I was sort of just saluting him from beyond. But anyway, his wife kind of led me through just what he thought about everything, religion, politics, you name it. And eventually she gave me a list of his favorite movies and music and all that stuff. And I switched to studying that stuff. So with the idea that it was kind of a weird idea, but I think it worked. The idea that if I could study the films, for example, that he was obsessed with, then I could start to become influenced by those movies in the same way that he was. And so I could learn to take from these works of art his type of inspiration and use those to fill in some of the gaps.
It's very poetic, you know, him living through you, you know, after his death.
Yeah, and obviously it's just the whole thing is strange because he was known for writing books about people coming back to life, and he'd worked on this book for 10 years on and off. And it's you know, it's terribly sad he's not here right now to be a part of the book release. But there is something kind of interesting in the fact that in a way he's brought back to life with this project that he, you know, that was really important to him, but he couldn't quite finish.
I love how poetic that is, though. Like he's still around, man, you know? And that's the thing too. You have so many references in this book that like I just was so giddy with as a huge Romero fan. I mean, even to like you have references to uncompleted screenplays that like hardcore Romero fans like have been waiting on to be made for years, even after his death. And it's like you're just resurrecting everything that is him in this book. And even to the point where there's like a whole paragraph where you reference other movies not within his zombie verse, but like in his repertoire. I don't want to spoil, like I said again, but there is one in particular that I was so excited about. It is one of my favorite Romero movies of all time that I literally, my neighbors were so freaked out because I was screaming so happily. And I just imagined how awesome these characters from this other Romero movie would look in the zombie verse. So perfect, man. It's just so good.
Again, that was sort of one of my little homages to him. I wanted to when I mentioned some of these other films that were not zombie films, I mentioned them in the context of storytelling. There's a character in the book who's recording all the new stories from the new dark age of post-zombies. And I wanted to communicate that stories, you know, are important and storytellers are important. And so that was sort of my way of giving a nod towards Romero having given us these other stories, and that those stories can guide us through the night and the dawn and the day and all those.
Oh man, that's such a primordial, like perfect concept of like one of my favorite scenes, not to take away from Romero, but is in Joe Dante's Matinee, where Lawrence Woolsey, John Goodman's character, is talking about how the first horror movies are caveman writing about woolly mammoths fighting them on the wall. And that's such like, for me, horror is such ingrained in our DNA, and it's stories that can teach us and help us throughout our entire history as a civilization. That's such a great way. The art that keeps us together in the apocalypse, which I love, by the way, the storyteller and the chronicler you named Etta Hoffman, which, you know, Tales of Hoffman is so good.
Yes, for those who don't know, Romero's favorite film was a film version of the opera Tales of Hoffman. And in fact, that was probably the film I studied the most because he'd been talking about it his entire career. For 50 years, every interview he mentions, you know, Tales of Hoffman. So what was it about this opera that he was so obsessed with? And I mean, I don't know if we have any opera fans out there, But there are lots of Tales of Hoffman references in the book. And the biggest one is really that I took the book and the opera both have a 3-act structure. And I used that as a model to sort of as a scaffolding to help with the missing parts of the book. And each act of the book has a theme that lines up with each act of the opera.
I didn't even catch that the first time. That's so awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're not necessarily supposed to catch it. It's just there.
So good, man.
Oh. Hey, and so you being attached to how were you approached to finish this amazing omnibus opus of George Romero's work?
Well, I mean, his manager knew that I was a Romero devotee and a student, and not just of his. This became important to the estate, not just of his zombie films. Like I was a real, just overall Romero head, and I'd come off a couple collaborations with Del Toro that were successful. So I also just had the kind of resume that I could collaborate with another writer successfully. So those two things put together, he went to Sue's, his wife, Romero's wife, and they just talked about it, and it didn't take very long. It was maybe a month after George died that they called me and said, we've got this novel. We want to see if you would be willing to take a whack at it. Now, it wasn't quite that easy. I had to, and I wanted to create a proposal of what I was going to do with it. So they sent me the manuscript,
right?
Read it. I saw where all the holes were, and kind of wrote something out that would be like, this is basically where I think generally, it changed a lot, but generally this is the shape that I would give to this. And that was pretty much it. And then, I mean, I'm skipping the emotional part of it.
No, right. I mean, I'm sure it was such an honor, immense honor, and it just very.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
high, deep.
I still can't, I really can't believe it even now. Like when something affects you so young and so profoundly, and you have a chance to sort of help complete that circle and end the story. And the novel does sort of end the story that he began in Night of the Living Dead 50 years earlier. So to be a part of that conclusion, to conclude something that really began me is a profound thing.
How was it like? So you said it's basically like he passed, and like a couple days later, you kind of got the offer. Just like, what was the process like in your mind of like that emotional point? Because like we were talking earlier in the green room about like what Romero meant to us. And like I said, the day he passed away was literally a couple days after I had just gotten a job at Blumhouse.com, and I was like, I finally made it, and my hero is gone. It felt weird. So like, and I'd written like an article about Romero at that point too. So it was like, it was weird. It felt strange. What was that kind of feeling in that intermediate time process?
Well, I mean, they called me about a month after he died, so it was still pretty fresh.
Fresh, yeah.
I mean, it's not like I was waking up crying every day, but it was something I thought about, and it still was. My hero was gone. So that, that's just something that was sort of in the air. It was. I don't know. I mean, I'm stumbling because I still, after 70 some interviews about this, I still don't know how to particularly verbalize it. I think one possible reaction would be to flip out and panic in a sense. My defense against that generally, when big projects come up, is to just work really hard, really immediately, so I don't have time to panic. And in this project, there was so much research to do, not just about nuts and bolts stuff like aircraft carriers or whatever, but just about George. There was so much I needed to know that I could really just get to work immediately.
And that had to have felt good too, right? To just go through like the movies and all his works and stuff. Like it's like you're celebrating and working at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, going through his movies was not painful. It was great. It was a different experience suddenly, though, because it didn't matter how many times I'd seen his movies. For the first time, I was watching them for a very specific reason. I was watching to find clues. Essentially, I was a detective, and I was watching to figure out where was he going with all this? And he did write some stuff that was for the very end of the book, but there was a lot of gaps too. So I had to figure out, okay, if I can really learn about and come up with solid theories about what his zombie movies 1 through 6, and I can understand the arc of 1 through 6, then can I project and begin to understand what 7, 8, and 9 might have been, And so it was a matter of drawing this imaginary line out. But first, I had to really take really careful look at those zombie films. Particularly, I watched all of his films for thematic reasons. So really drill down and figure out what can the zombies do, what can they not do, what are their changes throughout time, what is the correct order of the movie chronologically. It's not the way they were released. So I had to figure out all those things and then begin to draw a picture of what the future might be. Because the book was going to go 15 years into the future.
Yeah.
And the movies only ever went 5 years out.
I really like that too, that like the research shows, but also it's like, there's this thing. So this is obviously like a sequel to, a legacy that starts in the 60s. But the thing that I feel like whenever a IP or property is resurrected for a sequelization or a remake or anything in this day and age, it's always like so many these properties try to just do the same thing, and it's all fan appeasal. Yeah. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it's just like, there's a couple movies I can think of off the top of my head, I won't say, but like I watch them and I'm like, oh, I feel the same way I did when I saw the first one. And then, you go home for a couple hours and you're like, I've seen that. I never want to watch that again. I'll just go back and watch the original. And there's so many fanboys, fangirls who complain sometimes too that like when someone takes that original IP and changes up a bit, that like, oh, I liked it the old way. But what's great is like reading your afterword, so much of this stuff that advances the zombie lore is already written out by George.
Yeah.
Like, there's like 3 or 4 examples I can think of that you talk about in the book, which go buy the book and read it because it's awesome. That does that. And I love that you kept that in there and you advanced it instead of just like sticking to there's still so much that's Romero's style and themes from the older stuff, but you all advanced it. Like you said, it's 15 years later, and that's something I've really appreciated in that. Because at this day and age, zombies are so overdone. Yeah. Like, I don't see the point in doing a zombie anything unless you're going to progress that lore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't think I ever would have written a zombie book. This was the only possible zombie I could ever write is something like this happened, which was a 1 in a million chance. And if you're gonna write a zombie story today, you're probably going to do what most people do, and you're going to find some new twist on it, some new angle. But of course, George wasn't interested in any of that. These zombies weren't going to fly or something.
Yeah.
He created this whole thing. He's not going to add some new wrinkle to it. He's just going to play out his classic themes, his classic issues, and take them into the modern era and then beyond into the future and see where we end up. We talked about him being a cynic and a pessimist. He showed us a lot of ways to fall apart. But 15 years in the future, so there's a new page that comes. Once you manage to come to its little nub, and there's no more people to make no more zombies, then what happens then? It's just a matter of math. Eventually, there's no more fuel for zombies. So what happens at that stage? And do we finally get to see what Romero's, do we know what his dystopia looked like? Do we get to see what his utopia looked like?
Yeah.
That was a big part of studying not just his zombie films, but all of his stuff, and talking to his wife and all that stuff, was picking up the clues in all of his work and figuring out, okay, what were the things he thought were wrong about America that we could do better if we had the chance? What would the Romero utopia look like?
Right. For me, you were talking about the also going back to the redundance of the zombie genre. You can talk about the shows and the movies and all this different, influences other creators have had in the genre. For me, my biggest, I know I'm basically, I'm 1/3 into the book, and I wasn't ready. To tell you the truth, the biggest point that I knew this was George was the relationships between the characters. And not also that, but how relevant it was still is even today, the conflicting philosophies of these characters too, and how even though their world around them was breaking down and the walls were closing in, that their interconnections between each other was the most important thing. But I just find that very interesting, especially for our new readers, that this is George Romero's voice.
Yeah.
And it's when I was reading his manuscript before I got my grubby little hands on it, he really, he was writing like good zombie stuff, but really that's not where his passion was. Like when he was writing about characters and relationships, that's when you could tell, like the prose kicked him to another level. That's what he was passionate about. What are these characters?
Which I thought about, his movie Bruiser. That was so character and relationship driven, and you see like these, just these elevation of influences from his broader works going into this.
That's the thing too, is like Romero can't, even when he tackles something that's like already well known, like say for instance Martin. That's whenever I tell people about Martin, I'm like, this is what George wanted to do with vampires the way he did zombies. And it's also partially a slasher movie, but it's a movie about faith and how faith can destroy you. But it's, as you go for like The Dark Half or Bruiser, those are his slasher movies, man. Those are his 3 slasher movies that don't really adhere to the slasher movie formula. It's George's voice coming through that slasher style, and that's what's so great about his films and his works is like he can take the most overdone thing, and it seems like the most incredible thing you've ever seen.
Well, part of the reason of that is that he wasn't, as a young man, he was a big horror fan, but as he got older, he didn't consume it that much. He didn't watch or read a lot of horror. So the things that inspired him, like when I got this list of his favorite movies and all that stuff, there was not really any horror on there. So, but because he had sort of accidentally made Night of the Living Dead, which was this genius horror movie, that was the genre that he was going to have to work in, because that was such a huge hit. And then he made Dawn of the Dead, now the giant hit. So he was, I wouldn't say he was stuck, because he still had affection for the genre.
Yeah.
But
it's
he
very obvious with like Creepshow, how much he loved it. Yeah. Meteor shit.
So he was only his toolbox was gonna be horror. But the underlying messages and themes were all these other things that aren't standard. You see a lot in horror. But he was gonna tell them with horror tools. So that's what made them so unique, is that he wasn't coming at it from, oh, I want to make a vampire film. He was coming at it from, oh, I want to make a film about these subjects, but it has to be horror. How can I use horror to tell this thing that's important to me? And I think that's why he's one of the greatest horror filmmakers of all time, actually, is that I think we're all lucky, fortunate that he actually wasn't part of the horror feedback loop at all. He was really doing his own thing.
Yeah, totally. And it's like you said, I feel like with Del Toro is to Perlman as Tom Savini is to George. You know, George has, like you said, so much of this like storytelling abilities that he wraps up in a horror veneer, but Savini is the one that really like puts that out there at the forefront and helps him. Which man, reading the book and the sounds and descriptions you put in there of like the deaths and zombie kills, I felt like that was stuff Savini would do. Right. So I gotta give you some applause for that, man. I love that. Like, it was so good.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do in my books, it's sort of, ultimately, I can only do so much, and this book was going to have to be Romero Kraus book. There wasn't enough there that it could just be a Romero book. So that's just the way it had to be. And one of the things that I've done in my books and that I focus on a lot is trying to write beautifully about horrible things. My philosophy sort of being is that if you have to be able to find beauty in the most unlikely spaces, and taking that to the next step, you have to be able to find beauty in unlikely places and people, and that's how we connect. You have to be able to look past things that you're scared of and people that you're scared of and make those kind of human connections. So I love writing in the most vibrant, gorgeous, or disgusting ways possible. Hopefully all at the same time. And the occasional zombie mayhem was super, super fun for me to write. There's sort of don't worry, I won't give anything away, but there's kind of a climactic, gory scene that was, for me, just a way to sort of like go full Savini and try to make it beautifully disgusting.
Have you had any feedback from Savini, or did he?
Well, it's funny. I did a talk, I think on YouTube somewhere, with Savini recently, where we just talked about George. I don't know if we talked about any of my descriptions in the book, though. I don't think so. You have to watch. It's out there somewhere.
Yeah, we'll share it out.
I think it's on YouTube.
That's amazing. You talked about these really deep, descriptive, very interpersonal writing styles. So you growing up as a writer, what were your influences? I mean, did you dabble into maybe some different genres, comics, screen?
Right. Yeah. When I was very young, it was really Romero and Rod Serling. So I'm talking really young, so 5 years old or whatever. My mom was a horror fan, and every, let's say Friday night or something, Twilight Zone would be on. And so we'd watch that together, and then we'd watch Night of the Living Dead whenever it came on. So those were my two big influences. And again, I feel really fortunate in that, because Serling, like Romero, was really concerned with, again, class issues, race issues, social injustice issues. They were two fortunate people for me to have found, I think, at that time and place. And again, for a while, I didn't have any video stores, so I didn't have a whole lot of influences. Eventually, when I got to maybe like 5th or 6th grade, and we started to have VHS stores, I had a period where I got super into Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
One of my first books that I wrote was really a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel. And I got into Stephen King, of course. And Clive Barker. He was a real brain exploder. Once I was him in middle school. But I was always, and in high school I made a lot of movies with my friends, just the VHS camcorder. But those were all kind of funny. Like, I was doing my serious work. It was really my writing that I was doing on my own. So by middle school, I was writing novella things. By high school, I was writing full novels. But they weren't things that I was showing anyone.
Right.
They were really just for me. And it's hard to imagine today when we're in this world where you can share things so easily and get feedback so easily. But back then, that wasn't an option, and therefore, it wasn't something I was concerned about. I was writing these horror novels and stuff just because they were fun, and I would finish it, feel good about it, and put it in a drawer. And I think because I wrote so much that I didn't share, I developed a style because I was a hermit, just in my own little world, and I wasn't getting feedback. And when you get too much feedback, I think this can happen today. If you get too much feedback when you're a young writer, you start getting likes and favorites and stuff, you start seeking, unconsciously or unconsciously, seeking what people like, and you head more towards the center.
Well, you lose your voice. You can lose your voice, or your voice becomes somebody else's.
You start pleasing other people, and you start losing the interesting stuff, which is at the edges, and that's what horror is. Horror is the quintessential edge genre. And people talk today about resurgence in horror. That's all great, but we don't want to lose sight of where the real exciting stuff is happening, which is at the fringes.
So much of that idea and voice that you just talked about, like you kind of like honing your craft just by yourself. I think it's so interesting you talk about it that way, because there's a lot of that in The Living Dead. And it comes partially, I think, from George's mistrust of technology, but also just like that idea of like instant gratification for what you're doing. That plays a big role, I think, in the media chapters in the book, which I wanted to go back real quick. You were talking about your influences being Rod Serling and George, obviously. Tales from the Dark Side, I think, is perfect. It is one of my favorite anthology shows. It is literally George doing Rod Serling stuff. And you said Stephen King was one of your influences. Stephen King wrote a lot of that. In particular, there's a character from the episode The Devil's Advocate, which was written by George and directed by Michael Gornick, his DP, with the late, great Jerry Stiller as the Mandrake talk show host. And I saw a lot of that character in the face of the media of Rochelle Glass's character in your book.
Interesting.
I thought that was really cool. Like I said, you just talking about you honing your craft and not getting all these outside sources, because those two ideas are so ingrained in that media concept in this book, which I think is so good.
I had never thought about that. That's a cool observation. But I was a huge Tales from the Dark Side fan. In fact, I was really traumatized by one of the episodes. It's called A Case of the Stubborns.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the last shot of that episode, if you know what it is like really like freaked me out as a kid. And I had nightmares about it. And I was always terrified. I was so scared of it that when I was flipping channels as a kid, I was always scared that I would just randomly come across that episode.
God, and for me, one of the big episodes of Tales from the Dark Side was what was the one with the hairless monkeys, and it was like some scientist experimenting on chimpanzees, or it was really distraught at the very end. And they're just hairless and skin, it's just very freaky as a child, really, until this day, burn an image to my mind. But
that's also just got one of the greatest openings of all time. Are those episodes?
It gives me the chill just thinking about it.
Yeah, like that's honestly, I can't, because at the point I was watching it, I just don't really get scared by much. But the thing was, I remember when I got the full series on DVD and watched it all the way through, I would have to have the lights turned on sometimes just for that, in a world that's just as real but not as brightly lit. And the way it's like colored and everything, it's just so terrifying. Just that atmosphere. And perfect Halloween watching, by the way, when the first episode is a Halloween episode directed by Romero, and I think it's either the second or third season, you get one of Savini's first directorial debuts doing another Halloween episode that's just like basically "Don't be a stingy old man" is the idea of both episodes.
Yeah. it's a great series. I mean,
It's called Monsters in the Closet. Sorry, I have to look there. Monsters in the Closet. So
is that the one that?
Yeah, the one that I was talking about. It's part of the movie, the Tales from the Dark Side movie.
Oh, the movie. Oh,
sorry, it just
because for a minute I was like, "Is that the Seth Green one?" Seth Green's in one of the episodes too.
Hey, well, Dan, we got a question from a fan here. What do you think is the best part of Troll Hunters? What changed the most from the book to the series?
I mean, a lot changed. The book it's still for kids, but much older. So it's much darker. It's so a lot. I mean, most of the characters are represented in the TV show, but they're all aged way down, and it's much funnier. It's just much lighter in every way. So what do you think the best part of Troll Hunters? I assume you mean the show. I don't know. I mean, it's so vastly different than the book.
Sure.
I did like the part where my name came on screen. That was pretty cool. I just
yeah.
I mean, it's funny. I mean, I don't write a lot of stuff that's very funny, so it was kind of a kick to see anything with my name on it that was comical. So that, I guess that in general was my favorite part of the show.
Oh, excellent! Right. Can't wait. Awesome. All right, Freddy. Since we're closing down, we got about 3 minutes. We don't want to keep you here, Daniel. I mean, we can chat all night. Talking about our VHS horror days. Being out at the Blockbuster Hastings, local mom and pop video store, just going crazy on Grindhouse and Carpenter movies. Freddie, you got any last questions?
I do. So it's a part like suggestion and part question. I'm a long time ago, George wrote for Marvel, which that's insane to me. I was working in a comic shop. Yeah. We got Empire of the Dead, which is basically a direct sequel to Night of the Living Dead. I won't say how because you need to go out and read that book. And at one point, I remember AMC was toying with the idea of turning it into a series. And I was so fascinated with that idea to see George's style serialized like that. Because I'm not a huge fan of Walking Dead. And I remember I've asked George about this when I met him. I worked when I was at Alamo Draft House, and he was there presenting something. And I love his response. He's like, "Man, a soap opera with zombies? Come on," And that's kind of how I am with it. No offense to fans of it, but if you were to get The Living Dead into a movie or show, who would you see like kind of expanding that universe onto the silver or small screen? Personally, immediately I thought Jordan Peele should do a series of this because Get Out is his Wes Craven movie. Us is his direct George Romero movie. And I think John Boyega needs to play the Muse.
Yeah.
That would be my perfection right there.
That'd be hard pressed to do anything better than that. I mean, it's he would be the dream. I mean, he's such a big Romero fan too that he's just seemed like Peele would be the right guy.
It's so perfect because I remember no one posted more about George when he passed than Jordan Peele. Yeah. And he gave all of his thanks and aspirations and everything he's done since to George. So I feel, and like I said, when I saw Us is my favorite Jordan Peele movie or project, honestly. And I walked out of that theater thinking this is his Night of the Living Dead, like verbatim.
Yeah, it does feel very Romero. I can't really talk any more about regarding, but I will say that it's a shame Empire didn't happen, but I think it still could, and right, like in the time before I think Walking Dead got picked up, or maybe it was right after. They were working on a potential Night of the Living Dead. I remember that. That was reported way back when. And I've seen some of that material. So it's almost out of the that there were series. So I think we're overdue. Again, it's bittersweet if it happens. He couldn't get it done, and there's tons of people out there with money and power who love George and give him tons of credit. But I wish we would have given him a chance to actually make some of it.
And that was the most heartbreaking thought to me, man, when all that went down to. I was like, there's so many people who owe him their career, like give praise to him all the time. I wanted so badly. I think that was the most heartbreaking thing when George passed for me, was thinking about how much he struggled.
He really did. And part of it was sort of self-inflicted. Like he was never going to fit in Hollywood. Like that seemed, it's easy to, like, hindsight is everything. So it's easy for me to say that. Maybe it wasn't obvious at the time, but his time spent, there's that big gap in his career where like hardly anything made. It was like Monkey Shine and Dark Half, and that was kind of it.
Yeah.
But that time just, think of all the smaller Martin type movies he could have made in Pittsburgh during that time. And that's where he was at his best, when sort of working independently. But you also can't blame him. Like everyone has aspirations, and it's, I think, natural as an artist to want to go bigger and bigger and bigger, to prove to yourself that there are certain things that you can do on a larger canvas. Which, I mean, in a way, kind of brings us back to this, because a lot of the stuff that he couldn't do in the original Day of the Dead, when that budget got slashed, and then in Land of the Dead, when that budget got slashed, his big, giant, epic notion he put into this book. So some of that stuff has finally sort of come out. Like the book was his safe spot where he could do anything he wanted, and no producer could cut his budget.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for those that haven't heard, please pick up The Living Dead, George Romero, Daniel Kraus. Let's check out our books. Yep. Yeah. Where can we find the book, Daniel?
Anywhere. Anywhere you buy books.
Yep. We're going to post up some links. So, again, thank you so much. Such an immense honor having you here.
Hey, the pleasure's all mine. I'm happy to stand in for George anytime.
Oh, deep. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was our George Romero panel, Freddy. That was deep.
Right in the heart. Right in the heart.
That was deep. Okay. Well, let's go ahead, and I'm going to bring in Kevin Garcia, and I'll meet you in a moment. Hey, Kevin. That was a big moment there.
That's a heartwarming. It sounds silly to say for people who aren't familiar with the stuff, to say you have a heartwarming discussion about the Living Dead and about zombies and George Romero, but it's true for the fans and for the people that really take those films and those creations to heart. It means something to us, No,
absolutely. And for those, this concludes our 2020 Texas Latino Comic Con en mi casa, en tu casa. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being MC, co-host all day. We're tired. We had an amazing fun time.
It's been a hell of a convention, and honestly, I'm glad I was part of it. And you know what? I can't wait till the next time there's the Texas Latino Comic Con in person. But in the meantime, more conventions like this, all-day events put on by people that are dedicated to it. I'm down for it. Let's do more of these.
Absolutely. And please, everybody, follow our artists, our panelists, our guests today. Check out all their amazing works coming out. Thanks to Freddy, Ruiz, to joining us in this really deep discussion of celebrating George Romero. So the 20th anniversary of Baldo panel was great.
Yeah.
Well.
And the 22nd anniversary for La Voz de Mayo for the recognition of the Yaqui. So many things right now that are just like a really, really big deal for everybody, and I'm glad they all got to be part of it. Hector, you did an amazing job. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, brother, no, thank you. I mean, we wouldn't have done this.
Hey,
this together. David Dow behind the scenes.
Hector, high five.
Oh,
there we go. Yeah, we got that. David Dow, yeah, he's been doing an amazing job monitoring everything on Facebook. So thank you so much, man. And also Lauda, she did a great job helping open up too.
Yeah, and our cosplay contestants as well.
And Elia Maria and also my primos. Everybody's been doing a great job.
Great. All right. Well, this is Tex Latino Comic Con. Sign off. See you until next year, guys.
Keep making comics.